In this lecture, we are going to start recreating the index template by adding the language attribute. Oftentimes, it can be an easily overlooked attribute. However, it can mean a difference in the popularity of your themes. Let's try adding it. In your editor, open the index.php file. Let's replace the contents of the file with a standard HTML template. If you're using Visual Studio Code, a template can be quickly generated with one line of code. Inside the editor, type HTML:5. As you do so, your editor will recommend a template. Pressing the Enter key will generate an HTML template. Voila! We've got a basic starter template. Nothing in this template should be new to you. Let's shift our focus to the opening HTML tag. On this tag, a language attribute has been added. The purpose of the language attribute is to help the browser identify the language. By doing so, search engines can correctly index a site. In addition, screen readers will be able to pick the correct language profile for reading a site. Lastly, the common use case of the language attribute is to modify the styles of a document based on the language. Let's look at an example. In the body tag, add a paragraph tag with dummy text. Next, let's add a style tag to the head section of the document. Dozens of languages are read from left to right. However, there are languages written from right to left. Arabic is an example. If our theme is active on an Arabic site, we should change the direction of our text. We can check the language of a document by adding the language selector. Inside the parentheses, we can specify the language by typing a language code. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a list of valid language codes. Language codes are preferred over full names. This is because languages can be spelled differently from country to country. Language codes provide a standardized value for each language. The language code for Arabic is AR. Let's head back to our editors. Inside these parentheses, add in the language code. Next, let's change the direction by adding the direction property with a value of RTL. Essentially, we're telling the browser to change the text's direction if the document's language is Arabic. For demonstration purposes, let's update the language attribute to AR. In your browser, refresh the page. On the page, the text of our paragraph appears on the right side of the document. As theme developers, our themes should be compatible with various languages. It's common for sites to be multilingual. Hard-coding the value of the language attribute is considered bad practice. The question is, how do we generate an appropriate value for this attribute? WordPress has got our back. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a function called language attributes. As its name suggests, this function will grab the language of the current WordPress installation. If a site is using French, it'll set the language attribute to French. Let's give it a try. Switch back to your editor. Next, replace the language attribute with a pair of PHP tags. Previously, I stated that HTML couldn't be written within PHP tags. However, the same is not true for vice versa. It's perfectly acceptable to add PHP tags inside an HTML tag. This is how WordPress recommends that we use this function. Inside the PHP tags, let's call the language attributes function. Interestingly, this function is not defined in our file. By registering and activating a theme, WordPress will automatically define this function for you. This is true for most WordPress functions. We don't need to do anything to start using this function. Let's refresh the page. The text has been positioned to the left. Personally, the current language of my site is set to English. We can verify the attribute has been generated by opening the developer tools. Under the Elements panel, the browser will show the document. If we look at the HTML tag, the language attribute has been added. The language attributes function was able to check the current configuration of our site. It was able to add this attribute on our behalf with the correct language. As a fun experiment, you can try changing the language of your site to test the behavior. The language code should change accordingly. Super easy, right? WordPress has a series of functions for performing the most common tasks. For this reason, developers love WordPress. A lot of the complexities are abstracted away from us. That about does it for the language attribute. Before moving on, let's remove the style block from our document. It's not necessary to keep it around. I added it in for demonstration purposes. After you've removed the style block, I'll see you in the next lecture.